Our first meeting, as maybe a few of you will recall, took place in Paris right on the eve of the Paris Climate COP. How many of you were there, if any? All right. Oh, cool. Some old timers, retro. Great. For how many of you is it your first meeting? First Flare. Ooh, even better. Great. Welcome. So welcome to the oldies and the newies. It's so great for me personally to see so many old friends and colleagues, and also to have met some new people already. So very excited for that. As a befitting of a party, it's a celebration, and above all, it's a celebration for us of people and forests, but also of, I think, care and solidarity of many people, all of us here gathered to share knowledge, experience, and ideas about how we're managing together in our common home, this planet of ours. But I think even more importantly and crucially, how we might do better. So I'm really excited and hopeful. At the same time, as I was writing this, I was thinking, well, it's also kind of like a funeral. What I mean, not so much a funeral, but there are many things that we might mourn, to be quite frank. And I think it's well for us to remember that. So forest defenders, and so many of us that rely on forests for our dignity, our well-being, are threatened around the world in ways that are really unprecedented. There's also, of course, and I'll get to it in a moment, but brutal conflicts are still raging, injustice persists. And I look at the program, which I hope you all have too, and I see many stories of concern, of loss, and I think you can see that for yourselves. Of course, I don't want to end there. I did say this is a party, and I am very hopeful. And our gathering here is really evidence of that. So I invite you, look at the faces around the room from so many different places. So I invite you to look at your neighbor and look at their face. This is the hope that we're all here together, right? So I think any clear-eyed examination of the present and where we are, which is what we're doing here, cannot forget the past. And so we have to learn from legacies of oppression and destruction in so many places in the world. And we also, however, have to recall the victories that we have had. And there are many of those and worth celebrating. So this is and it also major research advances if I think back to FLAIR, a decade ago. And so this, I think, is food for us that can fuel us to help us together realize a larger vision of a world where people in forests everywhere are able to mutually flourish. And indeed, that's the vision of the FLAIR network. And we're here to help advance it. So that's the context as we mark 10 years of FLAIR. How did we get here? To answer this question, I invite all of us to step back and imagine, take the Wayback Machine and imagine it's 2015 again. What has changed since our little network was born? So first, there wasn't a Paris climate deal, which of course is a reference point for so many of the discussions around forests and livelihoods. And there was a lot of pessimism on the eve of the conference about what it could actually achieve after so many failed conferences before. 1.5 degrees centigrade target was, I think at the time, seen as pretty unlikely, maybe possible, pretty unlikely. The political landscape of the time was also quite different in many important respects. In my own country, we had not really considered that a washed-up reality TV star could actually become president. Brazil had its first female president. And its policies over the preceding decade had dramatically reduced the country's deforestation rate. The rise of far-right populists and of a far-right populist in that country and the undoing of many of these gains was still on the horizon. According to the FAO, the world's forest area was some 4 billion hectares in 2015. And at that same time, the Rights and Resources Initiative estimated that Indigenous peoples, Afro-descendant communities, and local communities had legally recognized rights to about 15% of the world's forest. Yet the claims of these groups and their concerns were very much still marginalized on national and international agendas, even as they built a powerful movement fighting for recognition and resources. Pop star Taylor Swift was only 25. I had to do the math then. She was 25 back then. And she was advising us all to shake it off. So fast forward to today on these topics. The ambitious 1.5 degree target for Paris actually did come to pass. There's a flare-related connection, which is the environment minister for Peru at the time, Manuel Pulgar Vidal, who later was a flare keynote speaker, was one of the key negotiators in that process. Of course, progress is being made. We have bent the curve in some ways, but it's not nearly fast enough, that's for sure. And we've hit the 1.5 degree Celsius target already this year. And so the window for action is really narrowing quickly, as you all know. That reality TV star in the United States, well, he became president. And immediately, one of his very first acts was to withdraw the United States from the climate accord in Paris. He was subsequently defeated, but of course is also ascendant again, threatening environmental and, I should say, political destruction on a scale really rarely seen, certainly in the United States. At the same time, anti-environment and right-wing regimes have been thwarted in Brazil, in France, more recently in the UK, and elsewhere. And forests are really higher on the international agenda than they have been, certainly than they were in 2015. And in the last 30 years, I would say. They're kind of commonly understood as a natural solution to climate change, et cetera. Mainstream understanding of protected areas has broadened to better include Indigenous peoples and local communities and their lands and their practices. And donors have actually provided and given a pledge, 1.7 billion, to support their efforts directly. Nevertheless, of course, deforestation remains a major challenge in many countries. And we're seeing an ascendant fortress conservation and even a kind of carbon colonialism in many places. Of course, at the same time, Taylor Swift is still there, the top of the charts, but I noticed her recent hits speak more of anti-heroes and cruel summers and midnights. So that's the backdrop for where we are as Flare turns 10. And I want to say that more than 250 of us have registered. Let's see if we could go to the slides. Great, yeah. So there we are, here we are. You can get a sense of where everyone in the room is from. There are interesting patterns and certainly some gaps, but more than 40 countries are represented here. 26% from low and middle income countries. And there's about 75 students, which is particularly heartening to me. So in the next 3 days, we will, let's see if this will work. Yeah. We will gather to reflect on the conference theme. And I just remind you that it's imagination and innovation for forests and livelihoods. Take stock of where we are. And what I'm most excited about is to try to together chart a path forward and try to imagine different futures that might happen. So we're about to get to it all, but I wanted to cover some housekeeping items. First, food and drink are great at this venue, but they're not allowed in this beautiful conference room. So please don't bring your lunch or drink and food in this room. The beautiful venue is ours to use. The rain seems to have gone away. There is a little courtyard outside, which was very popular the last time we met. So I encourage you to explore and get to know this place. For moderators of sessions, please show up early and welcome the panelists, get situated. And then we're asking you to submit a summary immediately after each panel. And we'll take all of those summaries and present some highlights back to you in the last session. Of course, you can share on social media if you so desire. And I think the last thing for me before we turn to the plenary, the keynote address, is just a word of thanks. There's a lot of people to thank. I especially want to thank, at the beginning, the University of Notre Dame, where the FLAIR Secretariat is based, and it really has allowed for the network to continue. So in the Keough School for Global Affairs, Pulte Institute for Global Development, and the Kellogg Institute for International Studies have provided really vital support, as has the Environmental Change Initiative and Notre Dame Research. I also really gratefully acknowledge support from the Ford Foundation, as well as meeting sponsors IUFRO, the International Union of Forestry Research Organizations, and the Wyss Academy for Nature. A thank you to the FLAIR Steering Committee and the Conference Coordination Committee. Actually, could I ask those of you who are on the Steering Committee or the Coordination Committee to raise your hands and identify yourselves? Great, thank you. So, and then in Rome, we've had great support from the University of Notre Dame Rome, particularly Anna and all the staff there, Alessandra and all the staff here. I'm really grateful for your support. And then, of course, I should thank Brian Wanba, who's the FLAIR program manager, known to many of you, all of you, somewhere back there hiding out. Certainly the meeting would not have happened without him. Daniel Masip, I also thank for providing video and all kinds of support for us. And the many Notre Dame students, I think a record number of students are here for helping out in various ways with the conference. Could I ask the Notre Dame students to raise your hand and identify yourself? Okay, great. Thank you. So they in particular can help you find your way, and if you have questions, they have green lanyards. I don't know how I didn't get one, but they did. And so they have special green lanyards. So finally, before we move to the keynote, I want to thank and acknowledge one other person, is Katya Nakamura. And Katya, I'll invite you to come up here. So Katya is the Associate Director of FLAIR, a new position as of this year, and I'm so thrilled that she is in that role and has been completely indispensable for all of this work. Anything new and better is her doing in the conference. So now is the time that I would have called Rukka Sombolinggi to the stage. But unfortunately, due to the conflict in the Middle East and flight delays, it didn't work. So lots of scrambling over the last 24 hours to realize that it just wasn't going to work for her to come. But this is FLAIR, and we are adaptive. And we are still going to have a really great event that features Rukka. So, you know, the theme of the conference is about innovation. So here we go. Here's what we're going to do. I will first introduce Rukka, and then we'll share a short video to kind of take you to Indonesia, where she's from. It's about AMAN, the Aliansi Masyarakat Adat Nusantara, which is it's a clever acronym because it means safe in Indonesian language. Anyway, we will hear about her organization briefly, and then she and her team recorded a beautiful video of her address, and we'll play that. And then I have invited 4 mystery discussants that are somewhere out in the audience from diverse parts of the world with diverse backgrounds to then come to the stage and respond or have a dialogue with Rukka and what her talk might mean for them and their work and the field. So that's how we're going to go. And then we'll try to use technology to allow all of you to interact and engage as well. I'll get to that. So that's where we're headed. And then we have coffee and we continue the discussion. So first of all, to say that Rukka Sombolinggi is an amazing person. And we are so fortunate to be able to listen to her and learn from her today. So, terima kasih, Rukka. I should say, for technical reasons, we weren't able to have her zoom in either. But she has agreed to take the questions that we'll capture and be in a dialogue with us in the conference. And so we'll come back with some answers to questions that you might have. So Rukka is the first woman to be Secretary General of AMAN, the largest Indigenous Peoples organization in Indonesia and in the world. She hails from the Torajan community in Sulawesi, and is really widely known for her leadership as well as her lifelong commitment to Indigenous rights in Indonesia and beyond. Her involvement in the movements traces back to her parents. As so many of us, our parents shape us. They hosted a pivotal meeting on Indigenous peoples' rights and lands in her home community in the early 90s, and that set her trajectory. She went on to earn her bachelor's degree from Hasanuddin University in South Sulawesi, and then a master's degree in political science from Chulalongkorn University in Thailand. Rukka joined AMAN in 1999. She also has served as a program specialist for the UNDP, their regional Indigenous Peoples program, and has held various leadership positions on Indigenous Peoples issues in Asia and beyond, representing her home community, Indigenous peoples in Indonesia, and much further. There's a lot to say, but let's hear from her directly. So I'd like to ask if we can show the video about AMAN.
Dunia seperti apa yang ingin kita ciptakan?
Anak-anak dari wilayah adat harus ada yang maju di DPR.
Fokus!
Masalah utama masyarakat adat di Indonesia saat ini adalah perampasan wilayah adat dan segala kekayaan di dalam wilayah adat yang sangat masif. Hal ini berdampak pada munculnya yang disebut sebagai perubahan iklim, yang membuat seluruh umat manusia di muka bumi ini terancam untuk punah.
Selalu wilayah adat menjadi target, baik target untuk pembangunan maupun target untuk bisnis. Dari pentargetan wilayah adat itu selalu disertai dengan kekerasan, kriminalisasi, perampasan wilayah adat ini.
Karena perampasan wilayah adat menyebabkan berbagai kekayaan, keragaman hayati dan budaya yang dimiliki masyarakat adat itu kemudian punah. Dan akar masalahnya karena pengakuan masyarakat adat di Indonesia itu berhenti di konstitusi. Kemudian ribuan masyarakat adat di seluruh Indonesia, sebanyak itulah keberagamannya. Sangat penting untuk memastikan seluruh masyarakat adat di Indonesia bersatu. AMAN beranggotakan komunitas masyarakat adat di seluruh Indonesia. Saat ini anggota AMAN berjumlah 2.449 komunitas masyarakat adat yang jumlahnya sekitar 20 juta jiwa.
Jadi kami inginkan supaya pemerintah harus mengesahkan negeri-negeri adat yang terjadi di daerah Kabupaten Seram bagian Barat. Mengembalikan status negeri adat
dengan tujuan untuk menjadi rumah bersama, untuk menyatukan visi dan misi, untuk bergerak bersama, mengkonsolidasikan diri, memperjuangkan hak-hak masyarakat adat.
Peta wilayah adat sudah harus menjadi kewajiban setiap komunitas masyarakat adat.
Indonesia terdiri atas 17.000 pulau lebih. Ada masalah geografis yang luar biasa.
Dulu kita sering ditanya oleh pemerintah atau oleh perusahaan, di mana sih, siapa sih kalian masyarakat adat? Di mana sebenarnya tempat, di mana sebenarnya lokasi kalian? Di mana itu letaknya? Dan itu tidak bisa dijelaskan dengan hanya mengatakan bahwa kami masyarakat adat A, B, C, kami berada di sana, di balik gunung itu atau di sungai itu gitu ya. Sekarang kita harus membuktikan diri juga dengan kertas. Pemetaan kita dulu yang masih sangat sedikit, sekarang sudah lebih 20 juta hektar sudah dipetakan wilayah adat. Karena peta wilayah adat itu adalah evidence, ya, bukti bahwa ini wilayah ini adalah milik masyarakat adat. Sekarang buktinya sudah ada, seharusnya itu bisa cepat dilakukan. Ada sangat banyak sekali kekayaan potensi ekonomi di komunitas adat itu yang sebenarnya belum sepenuhnya dikerjakan.
Maka AMAN mendirikan model pendanaan, mekanisme pendanaan yaitu CU.
Kita punya 108 kelompok badan usaha di tingkat komunitas. Jadi kelompok ini adalah kelompok-kelompok yang mereka bentuk untuk tadi mereka mengidentifikasi potensi ekonomi di wilayah adatnya.
Di momentum ini kita bicara soal strategi untuk bagaimana RUU Rancangan Undang-Undang Masyarakat Adat. Go!
Dulu tidak ada kebijakan yang mendukung masyarakat adat. Di tahun-tahun awal mungkin ada 2 perda. Sekarang sudah menjadi 159 perda tentang masyarakat adat. Kemudian ada undang-undang tentang perlindungan dan pengelolaan lingkungan hidup. Jadi ada kepercayaan diri yang muncul lebih kuat di komunitas. Ritual-ritual adat yang tadinya banyak ditinggalkan sekarang dihidupkan kembali. Seperti apa yang ingin kita ciptakan? Dunia yang adil dan sejahtera untuk masyarakat adat. Di mana masyarakat adat itu ketika mau mengelola wilayah adatnya tidak harus bertempur dengan tentara, tidak harus ditangkap oleh polisi, tidak harus berkelahi dengan perusahaan. Dunia di mana keadilan baik di dalam komunitas maupun di luar komunitas. Keadilan bisa ditegakkan.
Kure sumanga, terima kasih, thank you, manasumoraka, sampurasun. Greetings from Indonesia. My name is Rukka Sombolinggi, daughter of Lasok Sombolinggi and Ibu Denupak Rombelayuk of the Toraja Indigenous Peoples. We are the guardians of Toraja land, our ancestral territory in the heart of Sulawesi. Our lives are guarded by the principles of Aluk Todolo, the way of ancestor. It's a wisdom that sustains us through generations and now stands as our strength in facing greatest challenge of our time. I would like to congratulate Flair for this conference. Distinguished gentlemen, ladies, relatives, sisters, and brothers, I'm honored by the invitation and humbled to stand before you in this great historical city, not just as individual, but as voice of countless indigenous peoples across the globe. Our theme today, imaginations and innovations. But allow me to take the liberty of modifying the constructions and talking about imaginations for innovation. To think bigger about how innovations in today's world can only come from unconstrained imagination. Let's imagine a world where the Pope's declarations of 1492, which ceded the sovereignty of much of the world's indigenous land to Spain and Portugal, never happened. Where centuries of violence, slavery, and subjugations were replaced by respect and collaboration. Imagine if enlightened leaders had resisted the temptation to exploit millions of vulnerable peoples for their own gain, carving the path to centuries of inequality and genocide. Imagine if unbridled capitalism, where the rights and power of the individuals were tempered to achieve a just balance with the rights and control of the collectives. Imagine if the brutal state allocations of natural resources, land and forests, and other ecosystems gave way to justice and balance. But we need not merely imagine what change might look like. It has already happened. In addressing the First Nation in Canada, Pope Francis spoke of this. Sorrow, indignation, and shame, and humbly begged forgiveness for the evil committed by so many Christians against the indigenous peoples. And he added that we want to walk together, pray together, and work together so that the suffering of the past can lead to a future of justice, healing, and reconciliation. This humble apology was a powerful step. Yet, the unresolved human rights violations, land grabbings by the Catholic Church in Indonesia, in Flores, of the land of the Tukan and Soge Natarmage indigenous peoples shows we still have high mountain to climb. Make no mistake, the threats to indigenous rights are real and present. Over 2,000 land defenders were killed in the past 10 years. 2,000. In Indonesia, we have lost 11 million hectares of indigenous land to corporates and other energy, what so-called clean energy projects. But there are opportunities for innovation. Our innovations, however, doesn't look to the future. It draws from the wellspring of our past. For millennia, our ancestor thrives through collaborations and collective actions. It's this wisdom that holds the key to our very survival. The relentless push for individual and corporate control and power over our lands and forests has been nothing short of an assault on our collective approach to life and distributions of wealth. This twisted logic has morphed corporations into legal persons, granting them individual rights while conveniently absolving them of full responsibility. They now enjoy the benefits of personhood without shouldering the true weight of their actions, a dangerous imbalance that threatens the very foundations of our justice and accountability. Colonial and post-colonial governments, backed by powerful institutions like the World Bank, have ruthlessly championed individual and corporate strangleholds over our collective natural treasures, our lands and forests, and our ecosystem. They have relentlessly pushed an agenda that stripped away indigenous communities' control and trampled sustainable practices. But make no mistakes, we are fighting back. We are challenging this oppressive system head-on, reclaiming our rights to manage our resources sustainably. The sheer volume and depth of research documenting our efforts isn't just impressive. It is a rallying cry for change, a beacon of hope in our struggle for justice. But we are not just resisting. We are reimagining a world where our voices are heard and our rights respected. Community-based resource management is gaining ground, but we must go further. If we are looking for innovations, we must challenge the very core of how the world views nature. The commodification of forest, plantations economy, and now the market for carbon and biodiversity credits. These are not solutions. They are threats in disguise. After centuries of broken promises, we are expected to trust and participate in convoluted markets that do nothing but perpetuate business as usual. But we have other choices. We must resist the idea that markets, even the one with integrity, are the only answer. Instead, government must step up and facilitate just outcomes and hold corporations responsible for their decades of destruction. We support and reward indigenous peoples for ecosystems we have guarded for millennia and for the benefits that come from these intact systems. These are public goods that deserve protections and respect, not private sector speculations and commodifications. Our water, land, forest, marines, small islands, and air are not commodities to be traded. They are the very essence of our existence, gifts that we must work collectively to protect and benefit from. The carbon market debate reveals a fundamental misunderstanding of nature's interconnectedness. You cannot dismember an ecosystem, carbon, animals, water, air, and sell its part to the highest bidder. This is not integrity. It's desecration. Desecrations of our Mother Earth. A quick review of the conference program reveals a concerning gap. While much of the work presented does shed light on community forests and local livelihoods, enriching our shared knowledge on these critical topics. I noticed that out of 42 sessions, only 3 that explicitly address integrated ecosystem services, and just 1 tackle the crucial issue of indigenous peoples' roles in carbon market and offsets. Yet, hope persists. In Indonesia, we have made strides of official recognitions in the return of 260,000 hectares of our indigenous territories. We've challenged the central government's claim over our forests, but our fight is far from over. Our biggest challenge, and one that we need advocate and supporters for, is the need for a comprehensive indigenous peoples law to accelerate legal recognitions and protections for our indigenous peoples' rights. We also need support to adapt our lives and livelihoods to a changing climate. And above all, we need to empower our youth, our future guardians of our lands, traditions, our only home, planet Earth. These young people are our future. These young people are our future land and forest managers, and our hope to remain resilient and have future with dignity. As we explore solutions to the global crisis, I implore you to broaden your perspective and imaginations. See the world as we do, interconnected, interdependent, sacred. For we are indeed our brothers and sisters keepers, and what we do today echoes through generations. The time for timid actions has passed. We must be bold in our imaginations, fierce in our innovations, and unwavering in our commitments to justice. Our ancestors are watching. Our children are waiting. And the earth itself is crying out for change. Let us answer that call by all the strength and wisdom we possess. Let's save our only Mother Earth. Let's save all of us and generations to come. Kure sumanga. Terima kasih. Thank you very much.
Wow, wonderful. So much rich and inspiring content and words from Rukka Sombolinggi. I would like to now invite 4 people to the stage to reflect on Rukka's address to us. So Anne Larson from C4 ECRAF is one I'd like to call up. Anne. Honorable Honorine Ningto, Member of Parliament from Cameroon. I would also like to invite you up. Felipe Melo, researcher working on Brazil, and then Sharad Lele from Atri in India. Please come to the stage and have a seat. So I think you can introduce yourselves a little bit more if you want. Have a seat. This is our innovation. We're taking Rukka's ideas seriously here and innovating and having some response from this diverse and fantastic set of panelists. So I think I might start with Anne, if that is okay. I guess maybe I've known Anne the longest, so I can put her on the spot first. So Anne, the questions for you, and then really I invite all of us to think about what is the relevance of Rukka's address for each one of us and our work, as well as for forests and livelihoods thinking, research, action. So those are really the two questions. And if you have questions for her, as I said, we'll collect those separately and get them to her. So Anne, I invite you maybe to take a few minutes. So each panelist, we have about 40 minutes for discussion, maybe 20 minutes with us, and then 20 minutes with the whole group. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks, Dan. And wow, thanks, Rukka, for a fantastic talk and video, really, really moving. For me, I think three main ideas, 3 words, I guess, came up for me when I finished watching, or actually read through last night, her talk. Decolonializing, degrowth, and collective action. The whole decolonial discussion is really interesting. I mean, I've been at several conferences over the last few months, and people really don't seem to like the term. And there's a lot of reaction to it. At the same time, I was in the IUFRO conference a couple months ago, and the concepts of decolonizing are everywhere, especially from the speakers who were from Africa, Asia, and Latin America, but also elsewhere. Naming local people as rights holders instead of beneficiaries, development projects entering with humility and listening and looking at, not coming in as the expert, but looking for local people to drive decisions, to co-create solutions, to understanding different perspectives on even what the problem is that we are trying to solve. I did have a reaction at one point by one researcher who stood up and said, we shouldn't call it decolonialism, we should call it empowerment. And I thought that's just not a good option. It's so much more than that. Maybe we need to think about other words because it can be misleading, I guess. But it's also something not to be, I think we shouldn't be afraid of it. We need to really move forward on decolonizing our research and development. Degrowth. Similarly, I was in a workshop recently, at least 1 or 2 other people in the room were at the same one, where we had private sector, nonprofits, indigenous leaders, academics in the same room, in a coalition, a network that works towards recognizing indigenous rights and specifically promoting the private sector to respect community rights. And what we saw in the room was really quite a bit of a disconnect in terms of what is the economy we're talking about from the private sector that is based on growth. Really, the overriding goal is growth, almost at any cost, and in some respects as a legal commitment to their stakeholders, their shareholders, sorry. While the indigenous leaders were clearly talking about an economy of solidarity and reciprocity. So I think we have a lot to think about in terms of where we want to go with all of this. I was also on a call recently with a group of people talking about the importance of addressing political economy wherever we are and whatever we're doing. And one of the people responded that, no, it's not worth it because we always come to the same conclusion. We have to cater to the rich because it's only the rich who can actually change anything. And I thought, this is trickle-down economics applied to everything. But it's also a real challenge. What do we do? I mean, thinking about the collective action idea, I don't think I need to say much about that. We see AMAN as an incredible organization of collective action of 20 million people. But we do have to think quite a bit about what that means in the light of increasing a growing far-right movement, surveillance technology, the danger of collective action, including in Indonesia, which has been even problematic for C4. Anyway, those are just some thoughts that I wanted to bring to the room and to the next few days. Thanks.
Thank you, Anne. So I would next invite Honorine, if you want to say something now, I would welcome you to, or if you want to wait until you hear from others, that's also okay, your choice.
Good morning, everyone. I want to say special thanks to Flay. It's a pleasure for me to be here again 1 year after we met in Kenya. And I want to appreciate Flay so much for the work that they are doing and to say happy birthday to Flay. From what we have just listened to, I got my own observations, and I will be talking with experience from my own country, Cameroon, because I'm from Cameroon, Member of Parliament in Cameroon. When we talk of indigenous people, we understand that these are people who are underprivileged and they do not have equal rights like every other person. And at a certain point, like in Cameroon, the people we used to call indigenous people, they were like the Fulanis, the Moros, and then the Pygmies. But today, most of the indigenous people, I think they are no longer indigenous people, like the Fulanis and the Moros, because I think they have their rights and they occupy various positions in government, like ministers and parliamentarians. They are everywhere. So, but the cry remains because, like human beings, we are supposed to have our freedoms and we are supposed to enjoy what we have as our natural resources. And people are not supposed to tamper with what is yours. What belongs to you, you are supposed to have it. And I am happy from her speech because where I see the Pope apologizing for what was done, and she rightly says that was a good beginning. And I believe that we all have to fight it at our various corners to make sure, because there are some people who are not even indigenous people, but they are underprivileged and they don't even enjoy what they are supposed to. And I want to say that what we have experienced, like exploitation of the forest and the land that is owned by the indigenous people, only the indigenous people, they may think that they are the ones suffering it, but I see the whole population, the whole world suffering from what is being done to our natural resources, because today we are suffering the climate change. Everybody is suffering it. And at a certain point, when they do the exploitation of our natural resources the wrong way, they think that they are depriving the underprivileged or the indigenous people, but they are depriving everybody. So my point here is that at our various levels, we should help the indigenous people to fight this fight, because we will suffer with them. And in our various parliaments, we should make it a point to make sure there is a law to defend these people and to defend our natural resources, to make sure the future is good for us. Like she rightly says, that what we are doing today, our ancestors are watching, our children are waiting, and we need to give them the results. So I think this is just what I have to share, and I appreciate her speech so much, and I think that we have learned from it. Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe we'll just move down the line and hear from now Felipe.
Thank you very much, Dan, for the invitation to speak on this panel. It's a great responsibility because we are commenting, at least for me, I'm commenting on a reflection of highly regarded indigenous leadership in Indonesia. And as a non-indigenous person, I can only make a few comments and expose my solidarity to what I think it's the major social struggle in the world today, which is the struggle for territory. It's been happening, this kind of struggle for territory is happening in different fronts of battle in many different places in the world. In Brazil, for example, where I am from, this struggle takes place in the cities, for the movement of people who don't have where to live. It happens in the countryside, where the landless movement also claimed for territory to reproduce a way of living, a way of dealing with territory, with dealing with nature, dealing with food production. So I invite you, all of you, my colleagues, academics, practitioners of land management or restoration, forest researchers, to imagine a world where indigenous fight is now considered part of this environmental agenda as well. However, I would use the expression of Rukka, make no mistake, indigenous struggle, it's a separate agenda. It's their agenda, it's their own agenda. We can only sum up with them and hope that they can help us to create a more inclusive and respectful environmental agenda as well. However, we must clearly separate their struggle from the environmental struggle to avoid shading or obscuring the indigenous struggle as part of the environmental agenda. We are more like under their umbrella than the reverse. And commenting on the imagination, Rukka asks us to imagine a world where there wasn't colonialism, a world where the Pope didn't divide the land into two hemispheres, one for Portugal and another one for Spain, in the Tordesillas Treaty. And imagine a world where there wasn't millions of slavery people trafficked to America to serve as workforce, slavery workforce. But I would like to invite you as well to imagine the end of the system that caused everything, every one of these tragedies in the world. So we used to joke among many socialists that it's easier to imagine the end of the world than the end of the capitalism. And I invite you to imagine the end of the capitalism as a system itself, a system that caused all this exploitation and this colonialism. And I guess the indigenous people have the key to imagine the end of the capitalism because they don't really rely on the system to live and to reproduce their way of living. So because of that, I invite you as well to take sides on the environmental agenda, clearly take side. So I don't believe in such a thing as neutral environmental fight or neutral environmental research or neutral technology. So when we research on landscape management, on the relationship between poverty, environment, between development and forests, we need to take sides. We need to understand clearly that there are sides, and that our research, if we pretend to be neutral, our research will serve the wrong side when we pretend our research to be neutral. So because of that, just to finish my comments, we need to be very critical or very skeptical, at least, and echo the concerns of the indigenous people about this whole market surrounding the carbon now. Now it's carbon, but before was biodiversity, then was water, and was clean air. You know, we people with more than 30 years who have been, well, more than 40, but we've watched this agenda change along the decades, from water to forests to biodiversity and now carbon. And yes, after many decades of non-accomplished promises or broken promises, as Rukka mentioned, why should we trust this rebranding of nature commodization and keep this agenda going? And I invite you to imagine through the eyes and the imagination of the indigenous people, as I did last night after many glasses of Prosecco, and I received the video from Rukka's speech, and I watched it late night, and I was thinking, yes, this is the kind of meeting I want to be in. Like, this is the FLAR. This is a place of inspiration. Listen to this kind of people, listen to other colleagues, because I know many of us share this, we dare to imagine and to challenge the world as it is. And yeah, that's all. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Dan, and thank you to Flair for giving me this opportunity to present a few thoughts. But a big thanks to Rukka herself for such an inspiring and wonderful speech that opens up a whole array of questions and challenges to us as researchers, as practitioners in this field. Her speech reminds me of a speech given by the architect of India's constitution, Dr. Bhimrao Ambedkar, in 1950, when the country was adopting its first constitution as an independent country. And he made this point that this constitution, I'm just paraphrasing here, he made the point that this constitution guarantees equality in the political sphere because it adopts democracy, one person, one vote kind of rule. But he said this will be useless unless we also enable equality in the social and the economic sphere. And I think in a way Rukka is saying the same thing, using different words. She starts from the idea of indigenous people, which could be seen as a social concept, but then links that to the rights of indigenous peoples, not just in the social sphere, but over natural resources, which is a very political question, the mapping of their territories, which is also a very political question, and then goes on to challenge the idea of capitalism in the economic sphere. And so I think these links are something that really force us to reflect on what we as members of FLAIR or contributors to this larger question of forests and livelihoods should be thinking about. And I just wanted to flag 3 points here. The first one is that although we're talking about political forest rights as political rights, to what extent have we imbibed that in our own research? If you remember the work from which FLAIR builds, 10 years ago, 20, 30 years ago, we used to use the term community forest management. And so the focus on communities, which emerges from sort of the ideas of commons and common property resources and so on, is still at some level instrumental. It is still that, well, if communities get rights to manage the resource, then they will do a better job. And even if you look at the full form of the acronym FLAIR, we are talking about forests and we are talking about livelihoods. We are not really talking about rights. And I feel that we might want to rectify this as we go along and maybe tweak the acronym where the R in the word FLAIR actually represents forest, livelihoods, and rights. Because I think we need to make that mental shift from thinking about decentralization as a means to an end, decentralization of control over forests as a means to an end, to decentralization or devolution as a right in itself that communities must have. It's a democratic right that they have to control and govern their natural resources, not just a temporary tenurial change that has been brought about because we believe in Ostrom's 8 design principles or something like that, but which means that if they don't then follow through with what we might think of as sustainable forest management, then we, the elite will take those rights back. So I think that's one shift we need to make even in the research that we do, as to are we constantly looking at outcomes or are we really looking at rights as a democratic right that people should have no matter what the outcomes are, because they have a right to even destroy their forest. Because we live in a world, I live in Bangalore, which has no forests. They've been destroyed probably 1,000 years ago. So who am I to tell them that they need to conserve their forests, except as, in very sort of collegial terms. The second point that she's making in the economic sphere is really about capitalism. And I think there, again, we often fall short because we are all a product of the capitalist system. My own institute, as I'm sure almost everybody's university or institute that is represented in this room, are funded by social responsibility sections of corporations. We get money from the capitalist enterprise, we get a few breadcrumbs that then we try to turn them around and do research on what we think is fairly radical stuff. But I think we fall short of imagining our lives in a different kind of a degrowth, if I may pick up Anne's word, or a decapitalized kind of society. And I think that's something that we should be really thinking about, because otherwise we will fall into the trap that Rukka has pointed out, which is to think of carbon markets as a solution rather than as part of the problem. And I think that's something really, really important for us to focus on, that markets are not part of the solution. Increased market engagement, especially in the sphere of trading, ephemeral commodities such as carbon credits and biodiversity credits is certainly not the way to go. And the third point, sort of turning the gaze inwards in the sphere that I sort of represent, which is academia, I think the question of if indeed we are to take inspiration from Rukka's words, then it is about deploying knowledge for change. But we are trapped in a world which is cursed, and I'm saying the world of academia, which is cursed with the requirement to produce knowledge for its own sake. And in fact, not even knowledge, journal papers, which may or may not represent knowledge or new knowledge. We are trapped in this institution which has cursed us, and increasingly over the last 30, 40 years, that burden to produce papers for their own sake to ensure our promotions and tenure and so on and so forth has completely separated many of us from the real world, from the need to contribute to change on the ground. So I think the third challenge for us is how do we restructure the institutions of knowledge production so that there is actually not only the freedom to do work, as you said, to take sides and to actually deploy our knowledge for change, but actually prioritizes that kind of knowledge, not the knowledge for journal papers. Thank you.
And I invite all of us to have that debate now and then over coffee, but we have something like 15 minutes, and I'd like to hear from all of you in the audience. And again, thank you very much to our impromptu panel here. This is fantastic. So what we're going to try to do is have you engage using Poll Everywhere. I think this is also kind of in the retro spirit of Flair. We did this, I think, at maybe the Copenhagen or one of the earlier meetings. And I do it also in teaching, although not with the software. So let's see how it works. So I'd invite everybody on your phone or your laptop, if you have it, to go to the website here. And you will see a series of questions, and then we will be able to see your answers. You can type in your answers, and you can also see what other people have typed and vote. So the first question I think is really important, and it'll show up in a moment once you are able to get to the site. But that is, what questions do you have for Rukka? She was very regretful not to be here and produced really kind of on the fly that beautifully produced video that you saw. And so she's interested in continuing the discussion and has agreed to try to answer some of your questions. And maybe some of the questions even that the panelists, or points that the panelists have made, we'll share a video of this session with her also that she can respond to. So what questions might you have for Rukka Sombolinggi herself? So please, let's see what you have. These are excellent questions. I like this one. How does your community and AMAN prevent burnout among participants? This work can be exhausting. How do you maintain joy and motivation? I must say from my own side, that's a reflection in the opening remarks. You know, I really think this is a celebration, and it's beautiful that we're here. But we all know many of the problems and challenges. There's a lot of anxiety and a deep personal experience in many cases with some of these challenges. So how do we keep going? I'm going back to some of Honorin's remarks and thinking about the IP position toward minorities in Indonesia who are not indigenous. And I think this question of that many of the panelists raised about non-indigenous peoples, myself included, working together with indigenous peoples and how that relationship can go. I think Honorin also, in her remarks, talked about changes in indigenous communities, and each country has its own particularities. So these are some great questions. I think we'll take some of the top ones. Feel free to vote if you haven't, and we'll raise those to the top and invite Rukka to respond to some of them. So I'd like to turn to a more, I guess, personal question for all of you. The next question, which is the one that we asked the panelists to reflect on. What are the implications of Rukka's talk for your own work? And I would invite you to respond here, but why don't you talk to a neighbor about it as well? I think that might break up the discussion a little bit, and then we'll hear from a few of you as a way to close this. So please feel free to type in and also to talk to your neighbor about what some of the implications might be. So would anybody like to share with the group their personal reflection on the implications of Rukka's talk? Any burning something that someone wants to share?
Hi, I'm Nandita from the Rohara Foundation in India, and I'd like to sort of address what the gentleman from Atri said. And I'd like to ask how we can make knowledge available to the people who need it. At the moment, a lot of new knowledge that is created, the innovation, the imagination, is actually held back behind paywalls, and that's not good.
Thank you. Yeah, there'll be a number of sessions, including one that Honorine and others will be involved in on this question. And the woman right next to you, Beverly, will be part of that session. But that's really, FLAIR really does seek to take the next step. Of course, at the base is high quality research about, at the intersection of forests and livelihoods, but then through this conference and other venues, we seek to have discussions and translate that in various ways to decision makers, activists, people on the ground. Any other comments, questions?
My name is Andrea Vasquez Fernandez. I'm speaking in Spanish. And I am in the University of British Columbia, and I'm also honored to be here with Mariluz Canacari. She's from the Peruvian Amazon, from the Cucama people. And in our little conversation, we were talking about that despite the different contexts between the Amazon indigenous peoples, the Cucama nation, and the Toja nation in Indonesia, the struggle seems to be very similar at many instances. And I'm so glad and I'm really thankful that we can not just have self-representation, indigenous representation in these spaces, but also that we are entering into these conversations that might be super uncomfortable sometimes. We might not agree and there might be a lot of tensions, but are very important to have. One of the questions that I put in the list is, we are talking about respect. Indigenous peoples talk about respect, but how does that respect looks for the different indigenous nations of the world? And that's a question that I would like to, that I ask myself, because if different nations have different types of ways of feeling respected and different persons involved in those relationships of respect, of disrespect, the conversations are going to be very complex. But it is important to understand these ways in which indigenous peoples practice, imagine, and feel respect. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that's a great way for us to segue to the coffee break and have further conversation. Thank you so much for that reflection. Welcome, everybody, and let's go.